A ride in an Uber to a cabin quickly turns into a nightmare of trying to stay alive all night in a national park somewhere else. There might be a cabin that lures hikers into disappearing forever, and to top it all off, a family built a cabin in the beautiful woods, only to meet the worst kind of people with even worse plans. Welcome to Scary Stories. Enjoy tonight's scary and even weird cabin stories that will make you want to kiss the walls. Let's start Hunted by a Werewolf now. I've never felt like I was enough. When I had to choose between what I wanted to do with my life and what I probably should do with my life, it was the same story you've probably heard many times before. I decided to join the rat race because it would put food on the table and maybe give me enough money to do what I really wanted to do. There's no sculpting work in Cheyenne, Colorado, where I'm from, and I'm majoring in accounting at Laramie Community College. This doesn't make up for the part of me that seems to keep getting bigger every day. Nor is having to drive for Uber to pay for it all, knowing that the money could go toward materials, a promoter, or fees to have my work shown at expos in Denver, but is instead going toward tuition, books, and whatever new software program my professors make us buy that we only use for one semester and never touch again. It kills me inside. Even if it means having to deal with all the nonsense I have to deal with every day at work, like rude customers, unasked for one-star ratings, or trash left in my car. I'm not sure why I chose to drive strangers. My way of paying for college in the first place, for every nice conversation or funny joke I get about 30 of those and more in one night, it was impossible for me to sleep no matter how much is equal I took. I think I got into another one of my existential spirals, where I kept asking myself if I would ever get to where I wanted to be in life. I'm sure we've all had times like that, but mine seemed to get worse as I got older. If you don't already know, if you drive for Uber, you have the option of taking part in a promotion every week. For example, if you drive 50 trips you get $200, if you drive 70 trips, you get $300, and so on. As I lay awake in bed that night, I knew I only needed to drive 5 more trips to make an extra $350. I thought I could get up, do those rides, and maybe even take a few days off. Lord knows, getting up every morning at 4 a.m. makes you appreciate those who don't have to. With that, I grabbed my keys and went to work. Fast forward, after 3.5 hours, I was driving my last customer of the night to his cabin in the mountains. On the one hand, I hated these trips because they always took you far away from everything else and far from where you lived. On the other hand, they were always going to be a big meal, and most of the time there was a pretty good tip, too. I wish I had half as much money as these cabin owners. They were also a great way to turn off your brain and enjoy the drive because you weren't on busy city streets. But tonight, that meant I had another existential crisis when I thought about how everyone from high school was in better places than me and had moved on and out of Cheyenne. Thank God the trip is almost over so I can try to blast some music to drown out my thoughts. When I dropped off my customer, they were kind enough to give me a $30 cash tip. When I got it, I promised myself I wouldn't spend half of it on lottery tickets again. I said goodnight and typed in how to get home. Even though the sequel came out later than it should have and it was 3 a.m., at least I got my promotion and had enough money for a full tank of gas. I looked out the window at the full moon, then down at the lights of a city far away, and then around me at the miles of woods. I told myself that if I had to be stuck in a small town in the middle of nowhere with a population of less than 100, at least it would be as beautiful as this as I drove down the mountain. You don't want to be in that situation unless you want to give in to the urge to jump when you're standing on the edge of a cliff. But a roll of the window does the trick for me every time. I literally had to look down for a minute and a half to find the window switch and crash. The sudden noise made me scream. At the same time I heard a thud, I saw a big mass roll away from the front of my car and stop in the middle of the road. At that moment, I took a second to calm down. I was so glad that my car insurance covered everything. After taking a moment to calm down, I realized that whatever I hit was probably dead because it wasn't moving. I thought that leaving a dead deer in the middle of a downhill mountain road could mean life or death for another driver. I got out of the car and pulled it to the side of the road. After taking a quick look at the damage to my bumper and hood, I turned to move the deer to the side of the road. I thought to myself that I might be able to move this guy when I was about 30 feet away. From where I am, I can hardly see it. I noticed something as I walked. This deer looked like it had black fur, which isn't strange. I thought it was like nothing I'd ever seen before, but I knew it couldn't be impossible. At 20 feet away, I started to realize that this wasn't a deer. This animal was huge, splayed out on the ground as it was, so I knew it wasn't a deer. It could very well be 7 or 8 feet long. Is that a grizzly? I think to myself that I must have hit a grizzly bear with very dark fur. I've never heard of a grizzly bear being 10 feet away in Colorado. I could see fur with tangles and ears that were pointed. This was also not a bear. Then I noticed it moving. I stopped. This animal got up as if it had just woken up from a long nap, and it didn't look like it had been hit by a 2,000-pound car going 30 miles per hour. It got up on its back legs and turned around to face me. I know, I'm not crazy. On a clear night, the full moon was shining. It wasn't that I was seeing things. What was looking at me was 8 feet tall, had blood-red eyes, and had teeth and claws that would make a grizzly bear look bad. It felt like my heart stopped. We just stood there, not moving. Then I saw it. There's no way, absolutely no way. What I thought I was looking at was what I was looking at. If what I thought were true, I started to wonder why we had always thought these things were just stories. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but that didn't change the fact that it was there. So many things about this creature didn't make sense, like how it stood still like a wolf but used its arms like a man. But most of all, the animal looked so evil. The look of madness in its beady eyes and the way it snarled with its face twisted in a way that was so mean. It just seemed like something that could only be seen in hell. I said Jesus Christ, Christ out of reflex, and the beast blinked out of reflex. I foolishly wondered if, like when someone is possessed by a demon, saying Jesus' name just above a whisper would be enough to scare the creature away. I say Jesus again. I had a clear picture of what would happen. It would grimace, shake its head, and then run off into the woods. I was wrong, though. Instead, I'm sure that thing smiled at me with the ugliest, craziest smile I've ever seen or will ever see, as if it found the name funny. I took a slow step back, but I kept looking at her. I remembered this from when I was a kid and went to summer camp. Keep your eyes on the person and don't run and freak out. The creature did the same things I did. Getting closer to me. I went back 2 steps. It moved forward 2 steps. Then I had a thought. I took 1 step to the side and 2 steps back, but the creature just took 2 steps forward, drool dripping from its teeth. Then I got up the courage to move forward 1 step, but the thing didn't move. Then I turned around and ran to the car, and I could hear big footsteps running after me. Then what happened? Even though it only took maybe 3 seconds, it felt like a long time had passed. I was about 20 feet from the car. It moved quickly and loudly. At 10 feet away, I could feel the ground shaking under its feet. I heard that its step was half as strong as before, but that its speed had tripled. From 2 legs, it fell 45 feet away. I put my arm out to close the car door, but thank God I left it open. On the back of my neck, I could feel hot breath. I had to force myself not to smell the strong smell of rotting meat coming from behind its teeth. I jumped into my car and slammed and locked the door. But the animal was so close to me that I hit its nose with the door before closing it, which it didn't like. Not one bit. I didn't know how scared I really was until what happened next. Later, the thing tried to open my door by pulling on the handle. The fact that I was facing a creature with such strength, speed, and senses, plus the intelligence of a man, would later make my blood run cold. It punched the window with its huge clawed fist, breaking it. I put the car in drive and slammed on the gas, which almost made the transmission slip. I ran away from the creature screaming, more scared than I've ever been in my whole life. As a child, I've had to hide in my basement from tornadoes and come close to a child predator, but nothing has made me feel as weak as this. I thought I was safe as I ran away, but I was completely wrong. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw 2 red eyes that were following me. On all fours, this monster was still coming after me. It kept up with everything just fine. Now that I was going 60 miles per hour, I stepped on the gas harder. I thought about a high school classmate who died in a crash after going 50 miles per hour down a mountain road. The beast went from right behind my car to right next to me while I was going 70 miles per hour. When I sped up to 80 miles per hour, it didn't even slow down. It was so close to me now, and there was no more glass window between us to make even the weakest and least effective barrier. I got right up close to those red eyes. I don't know if those eyes showed anger, hatred, or hunger, but whatever it was, I was sure it was evil. I knew I had to pay attention to the road. Going down a mountainside at 80 miles per hour was almost a surefire way to die, so I knew I had to pay attention. I was careful and slowly went up to 90, but the beast kept up. It looked like it was working hard, but it was nothing this monster couldn't do. All around me, the trees and rocks were moving quickly. Then, I swear, if I had let this monster scare me in any way and let my arms twitch in response, I would have flown off the edge of that mountain. I had to slow down because the road started to curve to the left. I would definitely die if I didn't. I had no choice but to hit the brakes. Once again, the beast caught up and started to snap its jaws through the window. Every time I take a bite, thick drool flies into my face. Then, as if by magic, an 18-wheel semi-truck showed up before I even had time to figure out that it was there. It was going through the lane that the curve of the mountainside had been hiding. The animal saw us and tried to get away as much as it could, but we were both moving so fast that it couldn't get very far. It moved a little to the right and slowed down, but the truck hit it. I watched as it went flying like a rag doll. I laughed nervously to calm myself down. If I'd had more time to think about what happened, I would have cried. I thought to myself that this would be a great story to tell, but I didn't know at the time that it was just getting started. After a few minutes, I may have lost the animal, but I was still going way too fast down the mountain for it to catch up with me. Before I knew it, I had forgotten about a puddle that looked really deep and that I had seen on the way up the mountain. The sides of my car filled with water, and I lost all control. I hit the metal barrier, and by some miracle of God, I wasn't going so fast that I went flying off the edge of the mountain. After calming down for what seemed like the millionth time in the last 30 minutes, I knew for sure that my car was in bad shape. Now, based on all the warning lights that went off, I got out of my car and didn't even bother to look at the damage. I took out my phone screen, took a picture of my coordinates, and figured I'd call my insurance company tomorrow. I looked at how far I was from home and was surprised to see that I was only 5 miles away. I lived right on the edge of the woods I was standing in front of. I chose to walk home because of this. I just wanted to keep going and get home as soon as possible. I didn't want to sit in my car waiting for a tow truck and risk that thing finding me again. So I went into the woods. 2 hours later, I still had to walk about a mile or a mile and a half to get to my house. I still didn't understand everything that happened on that mountain. Did I get this right? Are there really werewolves? Why did it really want to kill me? Is that driver the one who hit it? Okay, questions. I could only ask myself that question about every 20 minutes. If I thought about them for too long, every sound I heard in the distance would make my heart start beating out of my chest all over again. I decided to stop thinking about what was over and start thinking about anything else. So I started to think about which TV dinner I would heat up when I got home. I wouldn't be able to sleep for sure. As I walked, I noticed that all the crickets, owls, and other animals in the woods suddenly stopped making noise. The other thing I learned at summer camp hit me like a ton of bricks. If all the sounds suddenly stopped, it's likely that a predator is nearby. I heard it then. The sound that will always come back to me in my worst dreams. The woods were filled with the loudest, most evil howl you've ever heard. This was nothing like a wolf howl or a werewolf howl from a typical movie. This sounded so strange and painful, almost like the animal had been stabbed in the heart. I stopped in my tracks and felt my heart drop into my stomach because it didn't sound like that way was very far away. I stopped moving for a second. Then I just started running back up the mountain without stopping to think. Everything happened so quickly and suddenly that I didn't have time to figure out what was going on. I was numb from the adrenaline and the fight or flight instinct, but now that I had calmed down at least a little and knew it was getting closer, my mind started to run with me. It had found me, even though it had been hit by a semi-truck and lived. It must have smelled me and gone out of its way to find me. How about that? So much closer, even though it was hard to get through the thick woods and there were a lot of low branches to avoid. This monster was moving at a scary rate and covering a lot of ground. I was running 1 second and on my back with blood running down my face the next. In the fog I was in, it took me a second to figure out what had happened, but I quickly realized I had run right into one of the low-hanging branches. I got up slowly. It was quiet, but not as quiet as it had been. I looked to my side and saw a waterfall about 10 feet away with a fast-moving river at its base. The waterfall was about 30 feet high. For a split second, the sudden silence made me feel better. Then I heard a deep, guttural growl that sounded like pure evil brought to life through sound. I heard the same thing, and it wasn't a short growl that only lasted a second or two. No, this went on for what felt like minutes, growing more and more aggressive. I really only had 2 ways out of this. Jump into the river or climb up the tree that just knocked me down. I had no idea how deep the river was, but if it was too shallow or if I jumped and landed funnily, I knew 30 feet would mess me up, bad enough that I would have no chance of making it out of the woods. I jumped as high as I could, grabbing a branch above the one I ran into and pulling myself up. As soon as I did that, the beast jumped out and would have tackled me on the spot if I had waited any longer. I started to climb the tree, praying the whole time that this thing wouldn't follow me up. I couldn't have been more wrong. The animal started to climb after me, going up the tree with me. When it was climbing, it moved slower, so I did have a better chance of getting away, but it was still much faster than I could go. I looked down and saw that it was getting closer to me. I saw pieces of fabric hanging from its teeth and hoped that didn't come from the trucker, who was out in the open with no car and couldn't run away anymore. Then I sprouted quite possibly the craziest idea I've ever had, with no more than a second's worth of planning. I jumped off the branch I was on, pulling my knees in as close to my chest as possible. Then, right before I would have hit the creature, I shot my legs out as straight and as fast as I could. Somehow, despite it outweighing me at least 3-1, I was able to knock it out of the tree. The thing tumbled to the ground and rolled right off the cliff into the rapids. Even though I kicked a branch, I was able to grab it and save myself from the same fate. The water below was moving so fast. I only got a quick look at it as it was being carried away in the distance. When I let go of the branch, it fell much harder than I had expected. I felt that in my stomach, but my only goal was to get out of there as soon as possible, so that's what I did. I kept going even though I was so traumatized that my mind and heart were dead. Even though the beast was gone, everything about it still scared me. Right down to the deepest and darkest parts of my mind. Every sound I heard was a howl, every little reflection of light was those ungodly eyes. Even the memory of the reek of its breath had made permanent residence in my nostrils, after what felt like an eternity to my feet. I got out of the woods and back to my house in what seemed like only a minute. Even the constant feelings of sadness and dissatisfaction that I had in that house when I was awake were gone, and in their place were a sense of sanctuary and safety. My ankle hurt from the fall from the branch before, so I limped as quickly as I could into my house. Now there's a field between my house in the woods that stretches about a half a football field. When I felt it, I was maybe 3/4 of the way there. At that point, it was clear. In hindsight, I might have heard footsteps before, but I'll never know for sure. When I turned around there, it was standing on its hind legs. I saw how heavy it was breathing even from that distance that I was at. Then I knew that this creature wasn't looking for me because it was hungry, but because it hated me, just like before. This time, it was the one who came to me first. It got down on all fours and ran as fast as it could. I still believe when writing this, that the adrenaline that exploded inside me at that moment was enough to suppress the injury I sustained not even an hour ago, and it was nothing short of divine intervention. I sprinted to the back door. In no time, the beast was almost on top of me. I knew my door was locked, but I also knew where the key was kept. I ran to the door and grabbed the plant in a pot next to it. I know it's not the smartest place to keep your spare key, but in a small town like this there really wasn't much need for a top-of-the-line security. I knew there wouldn't be time for me to open the door. So I did something which may have turned out to be a mistake. It was either get ripped apart or get angry. So I picked the second one. I took the pot and threw it right at the face of the monster. By then, it was only 10 feet away, so it wasn't a lucky shot at all. It was not at all ready for it. When it hit, it jerked back. I used the few seconds I had to get inside my house while it was still stunned. Then I turned around and started to close the door. I got it with just 3 inches to go before it shut. When something began to push on it from outside, that creature was far stronger than me. It was able to inch the door open against me. I knew that I couldn't win this. I took the chain lock and right in the nick of time I was able to latch it onto the keeper, stopping the door from inching any farther. But the beast didn't waste any time. It hit the door with the whole weight of its body. The first hit shook the dust off the top of the door frame, and between the first and second hit, the second hit loosened the keeper on the wall. I shut and locked the door. It slammed into the door. Even on the third try, nothing happened. Fourth didn't do anything. After the 1/5 and failed hit, the attack came to an end. I was afraid to look out the window to see if it had left the side of me that was closest to it, because that seemed to make the creature mad. I went upstairs to the second floor to find the window behind my bedroom's curtains. I almost had a heart attack halfway up. The short-lived silence was broken by a loud crash. The thing must have broken through the window in my kitchen. Without time to get over the shock, I ran up the stairs and into my room, where I kept my home defense gun, a .38 special revolver. I got to my room, shut the door, and locked it. Then I quickly went to the drawer next to my bed and took out my gun. I checked to see if it was loaded after I turned off the safety. Downstairs, I heard all kinds of furniture and glass breaking. It only seemed to want one thing, and that was me. I heard it move slowly up my stairs and stop. I knew it was standing on its back legs. Then, based on how fast it was moving and how heavy it was, as I hid in my room, trembling and on the verge of crying out of fear, memories of when I was a child and was scared of the boogeyman came flooding back. It trashed the door to my study room, just like it did downstairs, and then it broke the door to the bathroom. It knew where I was. I knew that even with all 6 rounds, a big, dangerous creature like that would not be easy to kill. It seemed to just shrug off being hit by a car thrown by a semi-truck, falling down a cliff, and landing in fast-moving water. At most, 6 small bullets could knock it out for a short time. I thought I probably knew I was dead. This thing was going to break down every door to find me. If I was lucky, I might get off 4 or 5 shots before it tore me apart. Then I remembered that my room was right above the steel cellar doors outside my house. But if I did what I planned, I would really have no other choice. As it knocked on the door to my storage room after that, all I could do was pray that this beast had had enough for the night and would just leave. I put the gun between my belt and waist and opened the window in my bedroom. I put my feet out first and then jumped out. That rush of adrenaline from earlier was long gone, and my ankle, which was already hurting, hurt even more. I fell down to my cellar and opened the doors. I looked up, and saw the animal sticking its head out my window. It was sniffing around, then stopped, looked down, and grisly snarled at me. It had bloody teeth to show. I almost froze. Then it went back inside, and I knew it was now or never. I shut and locked the doors to the cellar. I could hear the creature crash through the window and land on the ground in front of the cellar when I was outside. Again, it started banging on the doors. This cellar was made to withstand Category 4 tornadoes, but even those huge storms were natural. I wish I could tell you how many times that thing hit the cellar doors, but after 40 times, I honestly stopped counting. The doors had already started to bend by that time. That memory is what I think of as hell. A creature that wants nothing more than to drink your blood is slowly making its way into where you're hiding. You're scared because you know it's only a matter of time, not if. Suddenly, there was a pause for a minute, and I had a second to decide what to do with my fear. And I decided that for once in my life, I would take charge and show myself that I could not let something bring me down. I would use this time of peace to catch the animal off guard. It looked like one of us had to die for this to end, and I would do anything to make sure it wasn't me. I threw open the doors of the cellar and raised my gun, ready to aim and shoot, but the creature was gone. I looked everywhere quickly, even out my bedroom window. It was no longer there. Then I saw that morning had come. Over the tops of the trees, sweet, sweet sunlight was starting to shine, putting an end to the night's darkness. It was a sight I never thought I'd see again. I fell to the ground and cried out of relief. I had made it through that day. I took care of my car and told my home insurance company that someone broke into my house. I made a reservation at a hotel about a mile from my house. For the next week, my house would be getting fixed up, so my insurance company gave me a free place to stay at the front desk. The person who worked there asked me if it mattered where I stayed. This made me think, so I asked to be put in a room on the top floor. After reassuring them that my ankle injury was just a sprain and that I would be fine getting up there, I went to my room and, for the first time in years, I was able to just throw myself in bed and go to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the window to see what was going on. Even though it was far away, I was almost sure I saw a dot moving around my house. I didn't worry about it, though, because I knew I couldn't be sure what it was from that far away. Before I turned my back, I heard a sound that could have been a train whistle, but I knew what it was. Wasn't that a howl? And almost to make sure that I knew it was a howl. The dot went back into the woods behind my house as soon as I heard it. That made me start looking for cheap apartments out of state, where hopefully this monster won't find me. It's waiting for mrballen. I spend a lot of time out in the woods hiking. The natural world, left alone, gives me a strange sense of awe. So, when my wife June had to move for work, she told me we would have a little cottage in a nearby forest all to ourselves where we could go hiking. We never thought that having a few cats would make kids happier. It was a big deal, until you left the house to live somewhere else. I'm not really happy to say this. All over the country, we have left a trail of houses where the new owners have to deal with cats. After living at the new place for about 3 weeks and getting mostly unpacked, I was excited to go into a new forest the next morning. June was also excited for me. I was excited, and the silly grin on my face showed that. I had spent the night before packing, making sure to check, double check, and check again. She did the usual thing of remembering things like water, food, first aid supplies and so on. She gives me a blank look and nods toward the closet, where I keep the gun I always bring hiking for safety. She's never liked guns, which makes sense. Really? Then she asks, is the forecast for the day's hike looking good? Winds that aren't too strong? I told her, with a smile, it's not my first time around the block. June never really liked hiking. She hates bugs that make her sweat and having to walk too much. It's not a bad thing to do for fun. She's probably happy that I don't drink, gamble, or watch a lot of sports. So she wouldn't have to go hiking with me. I think she was hoping I'd find a friend here so I could go hiking with someone else. She kissed June goodbye before she went to work. I got in my car and left. The local national park is about 30 minutes away by car. I got there a long time before noon and parked. Only a few cars are there. As I pulled up, I saw a family setting up for a picnic on the benches nearby. On the playground, some kids were running around. I got ready to check everything once more. Near the parking lot, there was a small cabin. A park ranger who was outside grinned and waved to everyone. Just to the right of the cabin is a board that shows the routes that can be taken. Color-coded based on how hard they are. Each one had an estimate of how long it would take, what the terrain was like, how steep it got, what animals lived in the area, and where camping or facilities were. I quickly took a picture of it all with my phone, making sure it was a good picture. I changed the size of the map to make sure I could read it right. I was given a map by the park ranger. I said thank you and took it. Then he asked, "Yes, this is my first visit." I say that I just moved here. Since we got here, I've been dying to go up here. Welcome. He says that he's happy to have so much hiking experience. Yes, I've been doing it for a while. I'm glad to know. I only ask that you stay on the paths. We don't want anyone up here to get lost. Well, have a nice day. As I walk into the park, I tell the park ranger, have a good hike. It smiles. I chose the path that looked the hardest. It was the longest trek and had the steepest hills and roughest terrain. It was thought that the whole trip would take 6 hours. I'm glad about that. Plus, going that way gave me a chance to look down on the town and the area around it. It's been about 3 hours. At one of the waypoints, I stopped. There was a small camping area, but no one else was there, so I thought I was the first one up or that it was just a quiet day for hikers. Before going up the steepest part of the trail, I used a bathroom, ate a snack, and drank some water. I've been listening to the songs of birds and the random rustling of bushes as I made my way to a clearing where you can see the whole town. I took a short break. I took a picture and sent it to June with a note that said, already at the top. Easy as pie. I hit send and waited for a response. After a moment, I didn't hear back, so I thought June was probably at work. Along the way, I took a few more pictures of streams, birds, and places where the sun shone through the trees in a pretty way. As I went around the peak and started to go down, I saw a small gap in the bushes. It was very tempting to look at. I didn't go more than a few meters in before I turned around and left. Never lose track of where you are. I went slowly and carefully, taking care where I step. The tall grass and thorns made it a little hard, but I've been through worse. I got to a place where the sun couldn't reach because the trees were too close together. Then I felt something like a small wave. It was hard to explain, but it felt like walking into a room and forgetting why you went in there in the first place. I didn't feel like I was lost or didn't know what to do. Just unsettled. I was also uneasy about the quiet, because there had been sounds just before, but now there were no birds tweeting. No rustling. My mind goes to defense mode. There must be a dangerous animal nearby. I thought about the display board for a moment. The biggest animals out here were all listed as foxes, but there were no real predators out here. I couldn't find my phone in my pocket. Still no sounds. I opened it and saw that June had sent me a message. Where do you live? I answered at the beginning. I put my phone back in my pocket, and turned around to go back to the trail. My head was all over the place. To make sure, I quickly drew a map in my head of where my gun was left on my hip. I went to make sure. And it was on my right hip for some reason. I said, that's strange. It's odd because I use my left hand. I paid no mind to it as I slowly made my way back to the trail. A light breeze hit me. This was to be expected. But it grew quickly and quickly. Small white flakes fell, and I asked myself, is that snow? Before I could get to the trail, a swirl of snow came at me. At first, it was light and fluffy, but then it got heavy and kept coming. I made my way to the trail, which was now knee-deep in snow. The sky was now grey and full of clouds. A few puffs of cloud were floating through the sky just a few minutes ago. This makes no sense at all. I thought summer was here. June is my wife's month. I looked to my left and right through cloudy eyes. I knew that the trail went down to my right, but it was covered in snow now? What could be going on? I kept wondering. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. The wind and cold hurt a lot, so I went back into the small break to get out of the wind. It seemed warmer inside. There was a strange difference between the howling white and the warm green, so I moved farther back into the trees. Before I even noticed, it didn't feel as windy or cold, but the darkness was still there. I thought it best to wait it out. This sudden snowstorm in a warm place. I thought it would be even warmer further in, and the tall grass and thorns seemed easier to get through. I kept a close eye on the way back out by looking back as often as I could. I looked on my left hip for my gun. No, the right hip was it. How come? I saw a clearing ahead of me. It was a bit cloudy, but it didn't snow. This didn't make any sense. I moved just to get somewhere with better lighting. As I got closer to the clearing, it started to get darker. At first, there were just a few snowflakes, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, the snow started to fall harder. What in the heck is going on? Before I came here, I looked up the weather. I thought I saw a row of trees that went in a rightward direction. I went after them, and the grey sky quickly turned black. So quickly did it happen that my eyes didn't even have a chance to adjust, like when you walk into a dark room. I turned around and saw more dark. The path seemed to be thicker than it was when I went through my footfalls, and I couldn't see any breaks in the long grass. At this point, I was freezing. I had my arms around me and my teeth were rattling. That was so strange. Even stranger was the swirling snow that didn't make a sound, even though the wind was blowing fast, and the tall trees all around. There was no noise coming from anywhere. I turned into deeper grass and snow, and I'm not sure when the snow stopped falling, the wind died down, and I was kind of left in a white space until my eyes adjusted and I could see what was in front of me. A log cabin was a small relief until I saw that there was a wire fence and barbed wire all around it. Each corner post of the perimeter was taller than the fence and topped with a floodlight. I could feel my face going numb from the cold. The snow and wind had stopped, but the cold air stayed. I thought it was strange that there was a locked cabin in the middle of the woods and a blizzard that no one could explain. I also couldn't see my breath. It was supposed to come in clouds, but it didn't. The cabin was set up about 100 meters inside the fence. I got closer and got my hand on my gun, but I didn't pull it out. I just looked around. The light was on in the cabin, and a steady stream of smoke was coming out of the chimney. The door was open. Someone might have just gone outside to get more wood for the fire. The problem was that the snow around the cabin hadn't been moved. I was drawn toward the fence by how hot it was. I didn't expect to see what I did on the fence, signs that said "Do not disturb." Trespassers will see a sign that says "Stay out" and is written on a piece of cloth and painted red with some kind of brown paint. Don't do it. I usually follow the rules, but the cold made me want to ignore the warning signs, even though they were well placed and clear. I took my cell phone out of my pocket. The screen looked just like it did before. I sent June a message, cursed myself, and then called her. The dial tone told me there was no service, and the screen showed me that there were no bars and no internet. I really like the view, and please call me. I replied with a message. I'm okay, babe. We found a cabin and are going to stay there until the snow stops falling. That blizzard came out of nowhere. I love you. The message didn't send yet, of course. But right then I needed a place to stay. I looked at everything. Still, there are no sounds or signs of life. I could only see the tracks I had made so far. I put away my phone and told myself, screw it. I started climbing the fence, glad to get out of the snow up to my knees. If even for a few seconds I landed on the other side and, for some reason I can't explain, sank into the snow. The snow wasn't as deep on that side. When I looked at the cabin, the door was still open. Smoke is still coming out. Then I noticed something. It was right next to me. When I moved my hand to my hip, I saw that my gun was still on the wrong hip. What I saw sent a wave of fear down my spine. It was the perfect outline of a dark, still, and very scary man. He was in the far corner across from me, which was even creepier. He was on the snow, but he wasn't knee-deep like I was. "Hey," I yelled out like a fool because I needed a place to stay. He or she or it didn't answer. It just remained still. No matter what I did, I couldn't see any features on its face from where I was. From this distance, its skin didn't look like skin, it looked more like leather. I took a step to the side toward the cabin, and that shape moved in the same way. I stopped, so it stopped. I started to breathe quickly. I took a step forward and then did the same step again. Then I pulled my gun out. I got a gun on me. I yelled something that was a threat. Even though I couldn't see the eyes, the shape stays still. I knew it was watching me. We both stopped moving for a minute. I moved slowly, and the same thing happened. I looked over at the cabin and then back at its owner or guard. I pulled out my gun and pointed it at the ground, making it clear what I was doing. I'm going to keep going even though nothing happened. I took another step toward the cabin, then stepped back and did it again. It really didn't want me in there, and I couldn't stay out here. I held the gun still and took a slow step to the side, then a step forward, like a chest piece. I thought that in about 20 more steps, we'd be face to face. I started to sweat for no reason other than anxiety and fear. I'm not looking for trouble. Before I ran out the door, I yelled one last warning. As I got closer to the door, it matched my pace step for step. As it got closer to me, I pointed the gun with one hand and waited for it to get close enough for me to jump for the door. As I did, it slowed down and stopped. Inside I fell on my back, spun around, and pointed the gun shakily while kicking at the door to shut it. Something I saw made me want to scream. The thing outside now had copies of itself next to it. Behind it, there were about 4 more of them crowded together. As the door slammed shut, I jumped forward, pushed against it, and put the extra latch in place. As I felt a tiny bit of calm and safety, my breathing slowed down. I looked out the window, but because the cabin was so bright, I had to put my hands over my eyes to see clearly. I couldn't help but think they might come over and break the window. Then try to get me out of there. Still, I did it, and what I saw through the glass scared me. They were lined up in front of the cabin, with plenty of room between each one. I moved away from the window and turned to look around. I was in a simple cabin with a bed, 2 windows in the front, and 2 windows in the back. There was a bathroom through the door on the left. I thought there was a small table and chair by the bed. A lamp and an old radio on top of the table. There was a big mat in the middle of the room that had a strange pattern sewn into it. Another strange thing, of course. There isn't one. Where did the smoke come from that was coming out of the chimney? I thought I was used to the idea that everything was a trick. A piece of bait that was well placed to draw me in. Why would the things outside try to keep me from going outside? There were more things that made no sense. At that moment, nothing made sense. I stopped trying to figure out what was going on and started thinking about what I could do to stay safe and get out of here. I looked at the phone. No service still. Even so, it could be the weather or the area. I looked around again, but my eyes kept going back to the wall. From where I was standing, I could see words scratched into the wood on the one empty wall. I moved around to get a better look at them and figure out what I was up against. In the right direction. I could read everything. Don't turn on the radio, and stay in the dark. Don't go into the bathroom. Don't try. It doesn't help to pray. You are not alone. The last few words of the message were not a warning like the rest. Jimmy was scared, loved you, and was here. That's a song I know. I'll beat you. I'm going to try to leave. Good luck to me. None of these words made me feel hopeful. All of them could also be lies. In the end, the smoke was a lie. Why not? I turned my attention to the radio. I thought it wouldn't work. Could be a radio you wind up. As I got closer, the little plastic dials started to light up. It gave off static. Full blast. I could fill the cabin and make it echo. I couldn't help but cut my ears and fall to my knees, and as soon as it started, it stopped. I was very scared at the time, so I ran to the front door. I stood there with my hand on the door handle. The floodlights on the outside of the cabin let light in through the door cracks. Urgency hit all of a sudden. I kept thinking that I need to go. I need to. As soon as I got there, I ran to the back door. The light coming in through the cracks was blocked by their eyeshadow. One of them is a shadow. When I turned around and ran back to the front door, another shadow snuck through the cracks in the light. This weird stuff. I thought I had pulled out my gun and fired 2 shots through the door. No one screamed or cried out in pain. Instead, the floodlights went out in whispers that made your skin crawl. We cannot let him out. I continued to panic. I got out my phone. I looked at the lock screen and saw that the clock was jumping between different times, like 1800, 2100, and 1400. It went through the same times over and over again. I jerked my head back and looked around the table. There was a piece of paper by the bed that I didn't notice until I got close to it. At this point, it wasn't a surprise that it looked like an index. It had squares and the letters of the alphabet, from A to Z, next to each square. This is the letter A was 1, then B was 2, etc. I looked at my phone again, because something rang. It kept doing the same thing when it jumped. 1800, 20, 11,400 over and over. I realized that 18 was us, 21 was you, and 14 was run. What a useless warning. I thought it was very helpful. I started walking around the room with the gun in my right hand. I thought something was wrong with me because my dominant left hand suddenly didn't feel like it was. I tapped my head to try to think of something, but nothing came to mind. I went to the front door and opened it outside with one quick move. I saw those 5 people, and when I opened the door, they all ran at me at once. I think they are flickering. I didn't run away because I saw them for what they really were. The dark skin they had wasn't really skin. Instead, it was like latex stretched over bones and joints that stuck out. When they tried to stop me from leaving, every twitch they made showed tendons under the skin. They didn't have any eyes, and where their mouths should have been, there was just a slit. A horrifying smile with jagged green teeth. When they reached for me, I jumped back, and again I heard, we can't leave. It's too late to run away now. Then, I didn't touch the door as it closed on its own. I was kind of glad to be away from those figures again. But once more, I was also scared to be alone. I almost felt safer with those tough people than when I was by myself. What happened? Did they try to kill me or save me by reaching for me? The radio started up again, but this time it was even louder. I could feel each beat of that static. This time, there was a message coming through. I hear, minor break, which is followed by now I was staring at the radio in. I was kneeling on the floor mat when it suddenly started to move. I jerked away and watched the mat wiggle. The radio stopped when I reached out and grabbed the mat. I took it away. Down there, on the wooden floor, there was a perfect 8 by 4 inch rectangle that looked like a trapdoor. Then, something hit it from below. I ran back and found myself by the door to the bathroom. I reach out, pull down the handle, and stumble into the bathroom. It was light in the bathroom. After closing the door, I waited. I could hear something rattling, and something heavy hitting wood. My mind went into overdrive. He can't go. Did I get that message? I thought I was going crazy at this point. I stood up and took a look at my gun. I looked at and counted each bullet. 12 people were outside. Had gone silent. I took deep breaths to get ready. I took a deep breath and jumped back into the room, then opened the door to the bathroom. There was nothing different. The light from the lamp was still on. I took another look around. The wall of warnings caught my attention. Then I looked back at the mat that had been turned over. The huge hole in the wooden floor, which had been turned around. The trap door was open, and soil was all over the place. I hear Mo and look down to see a cat whirling between my legs. I can tell right away what it is. I moved with June and my cat from my first home. It's not possible. I got on my knees and picked him up. With one arm, I held Luna, and with the other, I held my gun in my right hand. I walked around the room as the cat wriggled and hissed, and whispers from outside told me again that I couldn't leave. I tried to stay calm as I followed the gun from corner to corner. As I looked at the message on the wall, I noticed that it was gone, no matter which way I turned my head. Then I heard someone else say, "You're not alone." This came from the inside of the cabin. As I moved toward the front door, I quickly looked around the room. I looked up and down and all around the gaping hole in the floor, but I still didn't know where the whisper had come from. Luna hissed again, and I tried to calm her down. I had to pay attention to make sure no one was coming after us, but then I saw it as Luna let out a wailing whine. I see this dark creature holding onto something high up in the corner of the room. It had no arms, just black tendrils that went back into the corners of the room. Its feet hung down like crow's feet. They flexed, looking for something to grab onto, and when they saw me, they snapped at me. I ran for the door and dropped Luna on the way. I threw open the door and jumped into the snow. I could feel that something was holding my backpack. I tried hard to get out. The leathery things from outside came in, but instead of attacking me, they went for my claws. As those leathery things started to pull me free, I yelled for help, scrambled up, and ran as fast as I could to the fence. Whatever to get out. I turned around. What could stop me? I saw those leathery creatures beat on the talons as they reached out through the door. Luna ran out between them, and the talons seemed to melt behind her. As I got closer to the fence, The leathery creatures turned and swarmed towards me. I unloaded my gun and shot all of them in the head. Luna then came after me and pounced on me. They fell to the ground. I took the time to run up the fence, and so did Luna. Now she was holding on to me as I swung over the top of the fence and landed awkwardly on the other side. I stood up, holding Luna in one arm and pointing the gun at the leathery creatures' bodies as they floated to their feet. They rushed the fence at once, teeth bared and whispering. He got away, which surprised me, and I was glad that they didn't chase me past the fence. As I fell backwards with my gun still in my hand, I turned around and hobbled back, the wind and snow howling at me. I put my gun in its holster and put Luna in my jacket as quickly as I could. I didn't know how long I had been stumbling in the snow. I started to forget things again. I started to feel scared, so I reached for my right side, but the gun wasn't there. I looked at my left. It was there. I ran as fast as I could with the energy I still had. I finally got out of the trees and onto a path that was dry and warm. As I stood there, a group of people turned to me and asked if I was okay. The sky was bright and clear. I got scared and reached for my gun. Then I saw one of them before. The park ranger who said it was him earlier. Calm down, son. What have we been looking for you? I asked. He walks slowly toward me with his hands up to show that he is not a threat. We heard from your wife that he hadn't come home. I moved away from him and used the hand I didn't need to grab my phone. The screen came to life. It was shaking. I looked at the screen and saw the date. It had been 4 days. More than 60 calls were not answered. I have over 100 voicemails and voicemails from friends and family. What? No, I don't think I was there for more than an hour. The park ranger then said something that broke my heart and made me cry. You haven't been around for 4 days, he told you. A few days later, when things seemed to settle down, I finally understood what was going on. I was in the hospital for a few days. I hugged and held my wife close. When I finally saw her, she had so many questions for me that I told her I would answer them all. When I showed her the moon, she smiled. She was, of course, confused, and she told me there was no way that was Luna. I think she just went along with it, though, because it may have been the only thing that helped me get through it all. On my last day in the hospital, June listened as I told the sheriff about how I may have spent a day or two in a small hollowed-out tree, how I rationed my food, and how I tried to kill small animals with my gun. It was the best way I could think of to explain why so many bullets were being used. The sheriff nodded and pointed out a few problems with what I was saying. He asked me how I had managed to stay so clean and well-groomed after being lost for 4 days. I used the card of confusion at that time, but June knew I was lying. She gave him a smile and said, "It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that he is safe and at home." The local newspaper wrote about a hiker who went missing and how he found his way back to his wife safely. They asked me if there was anything I'd like to be quoted with. I just told them to thank everyone for their time and work. I finally got to the door of my house. I let Luna go, and June and I went into the kitchen, where she was making tea. She turned around, looking sad and scared, and asked what was going on. I knew this would happen. I couldn't lie not to June. She pulled her cell phone out of her pocket. You said that a blizzard came out of nowhere and he found a cabin. The park rangers laughed at me when I told them about it. I didn't understand. I lied. I had to. If you knew the truth, you'd think I was crazy. I can't say for sure that part was true because I couldn't be more sure. And, as she always did, she put down her phone and smiled. Take your time, because your home is where it counts. A few days later, it was no surprise that I hadn't slept well. I would wake up sweating in the middle of the night. I had so many questions. They wanted me to stay outside, but once I was inside, they didn't want me to leave, and they didn't want me to leave with that thing that came from the floor. They fought it off. They must have saved me, right? About a week after everything happened, I was walking around the living room while June was sleeping in bed and Luna was sitting by the window. In the cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about that thing. I was sure at the time that those leathery creatures were trying to keep me and the other thing in the stop sign encounter from getting to Glory Be. I was a young mother who lived in the countryside of Pennsylvania. My husband had just broken his leg at work and was on disability because of it. We had just started building a log cabin home on some land at the base of a ridgeline. The main road wasn't too close to our property. He had to get off the two-lane road and onto a country lane, then into our driveway, which went through some trees and back into the deep woods where our home site was. The house had to be done. But we lived there and did everything we could to get by. I needed to get a job, but the only one that was open was the overnight shift at a factory, which started at 11 p.m. On a Friday night, I slowly drove out of our driveway and onto the country lane. I turned left onto the two-lane road that led back to town and wound around turns and curves until I got close to the first intersection. It was a three-way stop sign at the bottom of the ridge where another country road came down. I've stopped here a lot, and every time I do, I look up that hill. But tonight, I couldn't get to the stop sign because tail lights were shining in the dark. The car in front of me seemed to be stopped for a long time, but there were no warning lights or signals to go around it. So I stopped behind them, wondering what was wrong and why they had stopped. I stood there and waited to see if they went through the intersection. They didn't, and soon the driver's door opened and a big man got out. This man looked a little rough, but he was just like the other hard-working country people I saw around town. He started walking toward my door, so I rolled my window down a little and waited to see what silly thing was keeping me from getting to my shift on time. Through my dark window, he looked down at me. He seemed to be trying to figure out what I was like. He also looked into the back of my car, as if to see if I was alone. Still, I wasn't too scared. I had locked my driver door, and only rolled down a few inches of my window. As soon as the man started talking about problems with his car, I told him I couldn't help because I didn't know anything about cars. I just need a jump, he said. I knew right away that something was wrong when I heard this. He had his lights on. As I got closer to the intersection, I could see the tail lights from far away. He didn't have his flashers on to show he was having car trouble, and if his car was dead and he needed a jump, his lights would be off, dim, or dying. Instead, I could still see how bright they were. The man then asked for jumper cables again and told me to get out of my truck and look for them. No, I told her that I couldn't help. I'm sorry, but I'm already late for work. The man became more assertive and insisted that I help them, but he didn't beg or plead like someone who was really lost. This was a strong, demanding voice that scared and annoyed me at the same time. I'm not getting out of my car, I said, raising my voice and feeling a little scared and panicky. I saw a shadow move near my passenger door at that moment. Just as I turned around, I saw another man trying to open my door. That's all. I did the only thing I could do. I put the car in drive as fast as I could and put my foot on the gas. I jerked the wheel as I drove around the parked car and through the quiet intersection. When I looked in the rearview mirror to see what had happened to those men, my heart was beating fast. I drove my old car as fast as I could up the winding two-lane road into town. I could still make out their headlights in the distance. My thoughts were racing, and so was my car. If they followed me, I knew I had to get off this road. Once I went around a few turns and couldn't see their headlights anymore, I quickly turned onto another country road that I knew went around a golf course. A back way led into town. I finally began to feel better. Once I started to see streetlights and businesses, I knew I was getting closer to civilization. Then I saw what was really going on. I was really scared. I didn't know why they were trying to get me to give them my car so they could beat me up. I have no idea. I pulled into the parking lot at work, parked my car, and turned off the engine. I started crying and feeling scared again, and I broke down, putting my hands over my face and letting the tears run down freely. Someone at work saw me and helped me get out of my car. They led me into the building, where I told her and the manager on duty what had happened. They helped me call the police and tell them what had happened. Then I called my husband and told him to do it. They told me I could go home for the night, but I refused. I needed the money, and the idea of driving back the same route so soon didn't appeal to me. So I stayed. I went to the bathroom to clean up and clear my mind before going to work the next day. When I got home, I hugged my husband and son. When I got home, I thought about how lucky I was. I had made it through this without harm. Even though it's been more than 30 years, I still drive that way to work, and so do both of my sons. Most of the time, I've driven through that stop sign thousands of times. I don't think about what happened all those years ago, but I still tell this story so that maybe my boys and their families will be more careful and safe when they travel. Thank you for listening to another scary episode about strange things that can't be explained. Stay safe and weird, because this world is a weird place.